Alrighty then. I do believe we are recording. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 149. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And I know what you're thinking out there. 149, that could be a prime number. And in fact, 149 is a prime number. So I've been considering just getting like a prime number fez, because the Majamaka fez isn't getting much use anymore. In fact, oh, there it is. Yeah, it's still back there. The Majamaka fez isn't getting much use anymore because people don't ask questions about Majamaka very often, or about Nagarjuna. And I mean, Nagarjuna was kind of a multifaceted sort of person. But Majamaka, I mean, there's only so many questions you can ask about it. It's radically simple. Oh, this is the umbrella. It was in here like this. I don't know if you can see me take it out. So, I guess I should just wade into this and start answering questions. And we don't have a whole lot of questions. You guys are going easy on me this week, which is fine, I guess. So, the very first question is from Siovakshan Sipad Zidana. And Siovakshan Sipad Zidana, who considers everything to be some sort of cope, asks the following question regarding evolution, or at least it involves evolution. And this is two Q&As in a row that have sort of an evolutionary or Darwinian theme, because there are a number of questions that touch on evolution. So anyways, Siovak says, from an evolutionary standpoint, see, told you. From an evolutionary standpoint, is spirituality a type of coping mechanism? You can't achieve your natural desires that will make you and your genetic lineage prosper. So instead of being smarter, creative, or skillful at attaining your goals, you run away and try to destroy your desires instead, so you don't feel bad about being an evolutionary failure. And no. I mean, for some people, I suppose, probably for Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, I mean, first of all, before Darwin especially, I mean, evolution was not a mainstream concept. You know, there's some theorists, you know, going way back to, you know, the early Greek philosopher Anaximander, who believed that we all descended from fish, that kind of thing. But not having kids being an evolutionary failure, I mean, it was not a kind of thinking that most people engaged in. It was more like just a life failure, because when you get old, maybe nobody's going to take care of you. So anyways, let's see here. I mean, smarter, creative. Yeah, I mean, it's not like the purpose of existence is just to reproduce your DNA sequences. From a purely biological point of view, that may be valid. But biology hadn't been invented yet throughout most of the course of human history. So people just weren't thinking in those terms. Instead, spirituality, instead of being kind of cope, is, I mean, it's a case of human beings evolving, going with the evolutionary standpoint, until we are smarter and in many cases wiser than is in our best interests as a species that is intent upon reproducing its DNA sequences. So it's like we've sort of cut loose from instinct to some degree, not to the degree that a lot of people might assume, but still we've replaced a lot of instinctual stuff with culture. And sometimes culture can be like not in our best interests. You know, you just follow some tradition, just blindly following a tradition that maybe is not in the best interests of the species or of the society or whatever. So we've developed too much of a brain so that we can start thinking and having weird ideas like anti-natalism and all that, but also we've got a mind that is sophisticated enough that we're starting to get inklings of reality shining through the thin places in the illusion. So it's sort of like human babies are born premature, compared with other mammals, simply because our head is too big. And so, it's sort of like a give and take. This high intelligence that humans have obviously caused us to be one of the most successful species on the planet. But at the same time, it can be like led astray or just led in directions that are not just intent upon survival and reproduction. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, let's see. Have I answered the question yet? Is spirituality a type of coping mechanism? For some people, but the best spiritual people, the greatest spiritual geniuses aren't simply coping because they're not reproducing their DNA sequences enough. A lot of them turn to a spiritual life after they've already reproduced. So, yeah, I suppose. It's more a matter of we're too intelligent to just be a mindless reproduction machine. At least some of us are too intelligent for that. So, let's see here. So we find other reasons to exist, including understanding reality. I think I'm just going to move on to CO of Action, CPOD Zeno's second question, which is as follows. Why do you think so many Westerners in spiritual traditions suffer from narcissism, where they think achieving enlightenment will make them unlock their destiny of being the chosen one or something? Delusions of grandeur, looking down on others, and thinking only they have found the true path. I've seen this same trend over and over again. This reminds me of a statement made by a person I used to know, who said that when people go to see some famous teacher, in their heart of hearts, they're wanting that teacher to just single them out, point at them and say, you are the chosen one. So exactly why this kind of spiritual narcissism is so common, I don't know exactly. I'm not exactly sure. I'd probably be happy if I went to hear some famous spiritual teacher speak and they pointed at me and said, you are the chosen one. That would be nice, I suppose. Although it never happened and I wasn't really, at a conscious level anyway, hoping for it to happen. So, delusions of grandeur. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly. Looking down on others, thinking only they have found the true path. Well, thinking only they have found the true path, that's common even in mere religion before you even get to actual spirituality. That's just standard. Just about any religious person thinks that they have found the true path, or at least the followers of their religion think, that they have found the true religion. Every religious person in the world has such wisdom that they are members of the one true religion. So, that's just it might be a kind of tribalistic instinct, but it goes farther than that because they're going to unlock their destiny of being the chosen one, delusions of grandeur and all that. Just human ego is going to find a way to the surface regardless, even in very subtle ways in relatively wise people. But the exact answer to that, I'm not in a position right now to even hazard a guess as to why so many Westerners in spiritual traditions suffer from narcissism, where they think achieving enlightenment will make them, et cetera, et cetera. Although to some degree, Western people who are going into some esoteric field, they're sort of on the fringe anyway. and they might think that they're kind of, narcissists or whatever, kind of on the fringe, or how do I explain it? They're kind of special already. That's one of the reasons why they're choosing some esoteric or fringe spiritual system, because they don't want to be like everybody else. I mean, I can relate to that. That's been sort of like a conditioning factor in my personality, is just this idea that the majority is always wrong and I don't want to be like everybody else. And so you just go off and do something different. I mean, that's probably part of it right there. But aside from that, and there's the tribalism thing that I mentioned earlier, that's about as good of an answer I can give without just walking out onto thin ice and making some wild guess without having carefully thought it out, because I really have not thought of an answer for this question before reading it just now. So I'm just going to move on to CO of Action Sipat Zidana's third question, which is, apparently 3/4 of people have sensed their loved ones in some way after their deaths. Have you ever felt the presence of your loved one after death? And what do you make of these experiences being so common? Well, I mean, real paranormal stuff could be a factor. The only person that I can think of that would come close to this would be my father. And we had like a strong connection, which according to him went back more than one lifetime. That according to him, I was his father. I'm like a reincarnation of my own grandfather, which makes me my own granddad. So, I mean, I have felt, every once in a while you get this feeling that my father is near, or, that he's not completely dead, that kind of thing. But part of that is just I'm carrying, I'm like genetically, I'm half him. It's like he contributed half of my DNA. And it could be sort of a similar thing to like identical twins who, even though they're separated, they still think along the same lines. They have the same tastes in clothing and women, birthday cards for each other. There's a case of these identical twins who pick exactly the same birthday card to send to each other, even though they're living hundreds of miles away, that kind of thing. So, I mean, there's probably a lot of that involved also. Or it's just a kind of memory too. It's like memory isn't just images in your head. It's like feelings and so forth. So just having like a flashback of feeling the presence of one of your loved ones from when they were still alive, when they were close to you, I mean, that can happen too. So it's probably more than one reason why some people would feel like the closeness or presence of some close person who has passed away. It's that it could be genuine paranormal stuff, like the spirit comes, is kind of checking out on you, and just sort of seeing how things are going with you, that sort of thing, and you can kind of pick up on that somehow. But I would guess that most of it, considering how common it is, most of it would be just just a feeling, maybe a sentimental feeling that just kind of triggers. It's sort of like a deja vu or something. It's just like a feeling memory that you just identify as their presence, when really it's a kind of memory. Although, I mean, death is very liminal. I mean, death is sort of an opportunity for the so-called supernatural to come into this world, because death is just sort of a strange phenomenon in and of itself that has generated lots and lots of like mythology and just like taboos and just strange beliefs in general. And if faith is strong enough, it can make things happen. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd be even included in the 3/4 of people who have sensed their loved ones in some way after their deaths, other than just this kind of feeling like, he's there kind of, although I wouldn't I mean, even when it would happen to me, I wouldn't try to pin down the exact reason why I felt that way, because who knows? Wow, CEO of Action Sipad Zirna asked some difficult questions about things that I really haven't thought about very much. So anyways, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from RPAD, RPAD. Isn't it contradictory for monks to shave their hair and beard as a sign of renunciation or renouncement to the world, since shaving implies the use of tools, razor, soap or foam, brush, etc., the making of which requires an entire functional society with division of work, mining, smithcraft, and all kinds of trades. Keeping the hair naturally unshorn, as Sikhs and some Hindu sadhus do, would seem more fitting to world renunciants. Well, I mean, the Jains plucked their hair. I guess they might have still used tweezers, but they just pulled it out. They didn't shave it. At least they're supposed to. I think the main reason why Buddhist monks shave their head and beard is because the earliest Buddhists lived in ancient India, ancient northern India, the Ganges Valley, where it was the style for men to have long hair and beards. In fact, men of the upper classes, I have read, would arrange their hair in elaborate braids and so forth, so that you could even tell what clan they came from by the way they had their hair styled, you know, sort of like Scottish tartans or something. So in a way, it was a symbolic act of just cutting off their social status in that sense. But also there may have been some desire for the Shramana tradition, which include Buddhist and Jains and so forth, to sort of distinguish themselves from the Vedic Brahmins, who essentially had dreadlocks, you know, the Jatilas they were called, the matted hair ascetics who lived in the forest and tended the sacred fire and all that. You know, in a way, it could also be sort of distinguishing themselves from the Vedic tradition. But the main reason that I have read, that I've come across in books, is that it was a symbolic act of just cutting off your social status, because you could identify somebody's social status just by the way they wore their hair. Although, of course, you could argue, well, they're just creating a new social status of the renunciant, but they were supposed to renounce society. And I don't think that they were really thinking about shaving implying the use of tools, the making of which requires an entire functional society with division of labor and all that. I mean, Westerners think way too much with regard to like obscure ramifications of an action. You know, so like in ancient India, eating meat was not considered to be immoral even for a monk. Whereas in the West, they're thinking, well, you're by buying the meat, you know, you're encouraging this industry that kills more animals and so forth. And from the Buddhist point of view, it's subjective. Morals, these kind of considerations, they don't ramify out into all these obscure directions. It's just what is wholesome right here, right now. Or what is appropriate right here and right now. And to some degree, it's like Buddhist monks were just following along with previous Shramanic traditions where when you renounce the world, you just shaved off your hair and your beard, which again, kind of symbolic cutting off of one's social status, cutting off one's ties, one of one's ties with society. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the Zenithoid. And more evolution here. From an evolutionary perspective, what are the biological drives for things that seemingly go against a species' progress in the ability to survive, like sadism, auto-termination, homosexuality, monasticism, voluntary castration, etc.? Well, again, like the first evolution question, part of it is that we are like too smart for our own good, that we are capable of independent thought, and that independent thought can lead us astray to some degree. So let's see, sadism. I mean, sadism is just sort of a perversion of an already existing like animal instinct, which is, you know, to to get your enemies before they get you, essentially. Auto termination. Yeah, that's like a cultural thing that has sort of short-circuited the urge for survival. It's like a Roman soldier who dishonors the legion, falls upon his sword, that kind of thing. That's like human culture that is sort of supplanted just blind animal instinct. And that's not necessarily in all cases a bad thing. Homosexuality, that's found even in pre-human, like chimpanzees. There's a lot of homoerotic behavior among chimpanzees, probably among many other animals. Dolphins also, where it's become, in that case, it's just sort of like a social thing. It's sort of like the beta male is sort of, kind of asserting the alphaness of the alpha male by posturing in a like a female way to the male, that kind of thing. So that in itself is not purely like a human thing, although humans have probably taken it farther. I think in chimpanzees it's mostly oral sex and just the posturing part that could be considered homosexual. Monasticism, I pretty much already answered that one. Voluntary castration also, it's like we are no longer completely enslaved to animal instinct. That we have eaten the fruit of knowledge. We've eaten the forbidden fruit. We are no longer in harmony with God's plan for nature, in a sense. We can go our own way, and some of us go in weird directions. And that's not entirely a bad thing. Let's see, there's something else I was going to say here. What are the biological drives for things that seemingly go against the species' progress and the ability to survive? Oh yeah, I wrote an essay on this once. I can't remember if it's in any of my books. But sometimes we have an animal instinct that gets short-circuited by like modern technology. Like human beings have a liking for sweet food because in nature, among our ancestors, our prehistoric ancestors, sweet food was like fruits and berries. And that's relatively healthy. You get vitamin C from it and so forth. Humans cannot make their own vitamin C like most mammals can. So nowadays we've got like processed sugar and high fructose corn syrup and all that tastes sweet, and so it kind of hijacks our animal instinct for liking sweet food. Or also like pornography is hijacking animal instincts. Like a human male is visually stimulated. He gets aroused by a beautiful naked woman, a good looking, well-proportioned young naked woman of breeding age. And so pornography short circuits that, and you got all these, it's just pixels and, just digital information that is transformed into images and sounds that get men turned on. It's short circuiting animal instincts in that case also. So some of it is due to that sort of thing. But for the most part, it's just that human beings have become too cerebral for our own good in some cases. We've, to some degree, distanced ourselves from animal instinct. We're still laden with animal instincts. I've read that human beings actually have more animal instincts than most animals do. It's just that we're not completely enslaved to those animal instincts to the same degree as the average animal. So there's going to be more variation, which is going to be good and bad. Some variations good, some variations bad. Most variations more or less neutral. Let's see. So I think I answered that one. So I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's next question. After checking to make sure we are recording, and we apparently are. And I have to upload OBS Studio almost every single time I use it now, because I keep getting this glitch saying that it was shut down improperly, even though I'll hit exit and so forth, and then it'll just keep shutting down, and I'll have to just delete it and reinstall it. Had to do that like twice today before starting this video. Anyways, let's see here. Xenothoid's next question is, as a biologist, do you believe that individual organisms are hardwired to prioritize their own survival or the survival of their species or tribe? I think the best evidence for the latter is beings willingly dying for their own countries and families rather than always trying to save themselves. Yeah, it's, it's sort of like getting Dawkins, so the famous sort of smug atheist scientist who wrote The Selfish Gene and The Blind Watchmaker, and he wrote some really influential mass market science books. And really, from his point of view and from a biological point of view, it's mainly the gene. It's like you are trying to protect your genes. And so that's one reason why men tend to be attracted to women who resemble their own mother. It's like this weird thing that has evolved in humans where a woman who has a kid, a child, a male child, she's passing on to him a desire for a woman who resembles herself so that he will be like reproducing not only the genes that she contributed to him, but similar genes that are like in other people. So it's like the gene is really running the show. A human is a human gene's way of making more human genes, is one way of looking at it. So and this has actually been capitalized in some species like social insects, like bees. It's actually to a bee's advantage to protect the children of the queen rather than to have their own babies, because of the way genetics works out in the order Hymenoptera, which includes bees, ants, bees, wasps, and sawflies, and a few other obscure groups, where, let's see if I get this right. A female hymenopteran is diploid, has two sets of chromosomes like people have. We have two sets of chromosomes, one set from the mother and one set from the father. Whereas a male hymenopteran has only one set of chromosomes. It's homozygous, or is that right? I think so. So anyways, if the queen bee has offspring, then genetically those offspring are going to be 50% identical to her genetically. But the workers, they're getting all of their DNA from all of the father's DNA plus half of the mother's DNA, so that their brothers and sisters are more closely related to them than their own offspring would be. And that is how it has survived, because they are out to protect their DNA. They don't realize this, of course, but that's what they're doing. So they're more hardwired to prioritize the survival of their own genetic lineage, which is not so much the species, it'd be more the family. And that's one reason why humans can be so family oriented and so tribalistic, is this like pre-human instinctual drive. And it's not even instinct. Sometimes it's just mindless, like with bees, I assume. I don't know if bees are intelligent enough, or their nervous system is developed in such a way that they actually have instincts. It'd be just more like mindless reflexes. There's like no actual decision making going on. So yeah, the best evidence, he says, for the latter is beings willingly dying for their own countries and families, especially their families. But the countries, and to some degree even the families, is again culture to some degree supplanting instinct. So sometimes it's, just people die, they're not really benefiting much of anything by doing that. But definitely, from a biological point of view, it's like the gene is king. The gene and Charles Darwin. I'm going to throw that in there. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is also from Xenothoid. Do all the previously mentioned behaviors suggest that the primary goal of organisms is not necessarily survival, but power, pleasure, enlightenment, etc.? In the Buddhism and Evolution video you did with Brian and Ajahn Punadamo, the Ajahn mentioned that he believes consciousness is always seeking a greater vehicle through evolution. Let's see. So what is the actual question here? Do all the previously mentioned behaviors suggest that the primary goal of organisms is not necessarily survival, but power, pleasure, and life? Well, I mean, obviously, the primary goal of organisms, the overwhelming majority of organisms, is not going to be power, pleasure, enlightenment, etc. Like plants. Hell of a lot of organisms are plants. They're not going for power, pleasure, or enlightenment. They're just reproducing their DNA sequences. That's the way it is with most animals. Some copepod, some plankton out in the ocean. They're not going for power, pleasure, or enlightenment. They're just mindlessly eating and reproducing. So, let's see. Yeah, the primary goal of organisms from a biological point of view, and this applies to most organisms, especially the ones that are not as intelligent as we are. You get into the most intelligent organisms, human beings, chimpanzees, orangutans, bottlenose dolphins, that sort of thing, then they're going to be sort of deviating from just purely Darwinian survival of the fittest, like with regard to their perspective. They're going to start having, original ideas. They're going to start kind of deviating from the biological status quo because they're just getting too smart for their own good. So, yeah. So among higher vertebrates, power, pleasure, and maybe even enlightenment becomes more and more of a factor. But before you get up into the higher vertebrates, and then plus, I don't know, there may have been some extinct cephalopod mollusk that was sentient, way smarter than your average octopus. Maybe they would be included in this. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of organisms are either mindless in the sense of not having like a nervous system and a brain, or they have one that's just so simplistic in its design that they're just slaves to their own reflexes and instincts. And some people really aren't so different from that. I mean, a lot of people, and probably most people, are slaves to a combination of instinct and culture. So I guess I answered that question. I'm going to move on to Austin here, who says, given declining birth rates, especially amongst white Western populations, but also globally, do you believe Christianity, with its theological emphasis on marriage and child rearing, is better suited to addressing this demographic challenge than Buddhism, which traditionally prioritizes monastic detachment over family obligations? To some degree, maybe. Although, I mean, you go out to some rural village in Burma, and I mean, when I was living on the outskirts of Alondo Kathaba National Park, the village women in that area had an average of about 5 kids each. I mean, it's like you walk to the village, there's just little kids everywhere. So, I mean, the higher levels of Theravada Buddhism, they encourage renunciation and celibacy and so forth. But most of the people they just don't do that. They're just people. And so you could say Christianity is better for addressing the demographic challenge than Buddhism, but really it's a matter of what the society is doing. It's just setting aside what religion is the official religion of the society. It's like how technologically developed, how prosperous. It's like, the Roman Empire was similar, where it's like people just, when you reach a certain level of prosperity, you just don't want to have kids. They cramp your style. you can't have as much fun when you've got kids to take care of. You can't be as selfish, as self-indulgent. So it's that aspect of the culture that is more important, I think, than which religion you're following. Officially as like the state religion or just the main religion of the society. It's more a matter of other factors like economic factors and just like moral decline and just decadence is going to, it's just, like Oswald Spengler, mentions, he talks about in his Decline of the West, that it's like, or the cycle of history, strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men. And it's like the good times make weak men and weak women that just don't want to have kids. So, yeah, all in all, it may be that Christianity might give a slight edge over Buddhism with regard to how many children people want to have on average. But again, I think more important factors would just be like prosperity and technological development and just self-indulgence, a welfare state that's going to take care of old people, without them having to rely upon their kids as their social security. That's a big one right there. You take away the welfare state and people are going to be having kids just so that they're not going to be like begging in the streets or freezing to death when they get old and they're too old to work. Although I guess pensions can help stave off starvation and hypothermia in older folks too. Let's see, but if you're a subsistence farmer, there's no pension. So I guess I answered that, and I'm just going to move on to Master Poe, who says, have you checked out James Tour? He's brilliant, and I have no idea who James Tour is. No idea whatsoever. I didn't even look up his Wikipedia page or anything. I just have no idea who James Tour is. So that was an easy one to answer. And the ones where I just absolutely am clueless with regard to the answer are the easiest ones, because then I can just say, I don't know, and move on to the next one. And this next one is from Philalethes. And Philalethes is the one who asked the big question about evolution last time. And he started another, this huge essay question. And it's like, he says, my question is the same as last time, namely, who should one believe in the large-scale evolution of species by natural selection? So he just asked the same question again. And so I said, look, I'm not going to answer this whole same question again. But there are a few things that I might as well comment upon. And in his long question, which is mostly just commentary, he says, among other things, quote, my main contention is that there seems to be insufficient or no evidence of macroevolution. So, he just dismissed and ignored my answer to the last question. It's like, I didn't give the answer he wanted, so he just asked the same question again, hoping to get a different answer. But he says no evidence of macroevolution in the previous question, no evidence. So I spend several minutes listing off evidence, the evidence of the fossil record, the evidence of embryological development, the evidence of vestigial organs. And then after that, he says, no evidence, which apparently means that he's just parroting this no evidence thing. And even if he hears evidence, he doesn't want to hear it. So then he says here, the paleontological record shows that we never have the intermediate forms that Darwin relies on. Again, he just dismissed the whole idea of chronospecies. I told him about chronospecies, dismissed it. Nope. But always a sudden appearance of species. And that is one thing that is common in the fossil record, is you don't have an obvious intermediate stage, although there's intermediate stages everywhere. For example, an amphibian is intermediate between a fish and a reptile. Just to give it like a really obvious, uncontroversial example. But, I mean, it happens at a smaller scale, just the different stages. I mean, you don't have nothing but reptiles and all of a sudden, boom, you've got this fully formed mammal. It doesn't work like that. The earliest mammals were almost reptiles, like monotremes who still exist, like the echidnas and the platypus. They still lay eggs. They don't have nipples. It's just that the milk, the mother lies on her back and the milk just kind of pools up on her chest through pores. And if you looked at a monotreme skeleton, even an expert, they would have to assume that it's a reptile, except for some bones in the skull. That's the only difference. In the earliest reptile, or the earliest mammals, it's almost a reptile. Or like another example is a tadpole, an embryonic, a larval frog. If you had like a scientist, a biologist who looked at a tadpole, had no concept of frogs, he would assume that's a fish because of the embryological development and so forth. So, I mean, I'll just read a little bit more here before I do any more ranting. The traditional view is that life does not increase in complexity over time, contra Darwin's thesis, which says life becomes more complex through evolution. In defense against this, microbiology has shown that the simplest unit of life, the cell, has a complexity beyond imagination, and that life does not go from the simple to the complex, but starts with infinite complexity. Well, infinite complexity is a bit of an exaggeration. And also, you consider the most simple, the most archaic kingdom of life is the archaebacteria. They're anaerobic bacteria. They're like the first living beings on this planet. And they're not nearly as complex in certain ways as more advanced, like Monera, I don't know, it'd be eubacteria, something like that. I think they've changed the name of the kingdom, which includes most bacteria and like blue-green algae and so forth. And then you get into animals, plants, fungi, that sort of thing. So the archaebacteria are noticeably less advanced or less complex than subsequent life forms. And the archaebacteria were the only life forms on this planet for billions of years, according to the fossil record, which Philalethes doesn't seem to have much use for. So, and it's also true that evolution isn't necessarily going from simple to complex. Evolution can go from complex to simpler forms. For example, the flea. The ancestors of the flea had wings, but they lost their wings. And because, they adopted a life of being a parasite living on the body of a dog or something, the wings would just get in the way. It would increase the likelihood of them being like injured or something. So they just lost the wings, but their ancestors had wings. It is true that there does seem to be what Stephen Jay Gould called punctuated equilibrium in evolution, where you have like a not sudden, I mean, still takes a long time, but a relatively quick change in form followed by a kind of stasis and then relatively quick form. But the evolution of the human species, it's sort of like a continuum, and it's like arbitrary where you draw the line between species because it was a continuum. Like some fossil remains of pre-humans, it's like, is that Homo erectus? Is that an advanced Homo erectus or a primitive Homo steinheimensis? Or heidelbergensis, I mean. So, yeah, I mean, the whole idea that there are no intermediate forms, again, just dismisses chronospecies. And Stephen Jay Gould, I have to admit, I mean, he has been sort of outed as a kind of fraud, although not with regard to his punctuated equilibrium theory of how evolution works, but because of mainly this one book he wrote called The Mismeasure of Man, where he's saying that earlier anthropologists were cooking their data to make like certain ethnicities appear to have a larger cranial capacity than other ethnicities. And it turned out that Stephen Jay Gould himself was falsifying the data because actually there are such differences. But we can set that aside. We don't have to discuss that sort of thing. But I mean, again, getting back to the main question, that evolution is so obvious that it should not be a question of whether evolution occurs. I mean, going with empirical science, it should not be a question as to whether it happens, as how it happens. If you think that like natural selection is insufficient, you can add other factors like Schopenhauer's will, more metaphysical stuff like Ajahn Punadhammo was talking about. But I mean, it's so obvious that there is like this sequential development of life forms. You know, first few billion years, nothing but like the most primitive bacteria. Then you get enough oxygen in the air, you get like bacteria that can metabolize, that can respire using aerobic respiration, which makes them much more efficient at respiration, at their metabolism. And then there is evidence that some of the organelles of a eukaryotic cell, like an amoeba or something, it's a single-celled form. It's a single-celled life form. It's not a bacterium though, because they have organelles like mitochondria, and plants have like chloroplasts. And there is evidence that mitochondria and these chromoplasts, or like let's call it a chloroplast, although there's other kinds similar to chloroplasts, they have their own DNA, which indicates it lends credence to the theory that the original mitochondrion was a kind of symbiotic bacterium living inside of a larger bacterium. Otherwise, why do they have their own DNA? So just getting back to like the fossil record, setting aside the larval development, embryological development, and also vestigial organs. I mean, you don't have a mammal arising before you have mammal-like reptiles. I mean, mammals didn't just suddenly appear in the Precambrian explosion. There were no animals with bones for a very long time. So it's like the mammals didn't arise until you had mammal-like reptiles called therapsids that arose. Reptiles didn't arise until they were already like reptile-like amphibians. The amphibians didn't arise until you had lungfish, fishes with lungs, and so on. I mean, it is obviously a sequential development based upon pre-existing forms. It's not just shit just appearing magically out of nothing. And if you don't think that natural selection along Darwinian lines can account for that, then you can come up with other ways of accounting for it. But still, you've got that to account for. And just to reject it, to say no evidence, is just willful blindness. So I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's. I mean, after I told him I wasn't going to answer that question again, which I kind of just did, he asked 3 other questions. So I'm letting it slide. He asks what would ordinarily be the transgressive 4th question, but considering that I kind of dismissed his first question because it's the second time he's asked the same question in 2 videos in a row, I just said I wasn't. So he came up with 3 new ones, which is fine. So he says, do you think sexual promiscuity is bad for a man? In most cases, yes. I mean, there can be like exceptional cases. It may be that Gautama Buddha, before he was enlightened, was sexually promiscuous. He had, according to the legends, he had a harem of dancing girls and female musicians, a harem of slave girls. You know, the house was full of beautiful young women. So there's a possibility that he wasn't just messing around with his wife. And it was probably socially acceptable back then, except maybe to the wives. But I mean, and it could be that in cases like that, a man can have his fill of sensuality and realize that it's still not satisfying. It's just not deeply satisfying. And so they start looking for something else. And that's one reason why you have so much spirituality in like California, where you've got these rich, beautiful people that get everything they want pretty much. And still, some of them have the wisdom to and the sensitivity to know they're still not satisfied, so that they reach out for something higher. But for the most part, and I think Gautama Buddha would agree, he does in the suttas, sexual promiscuity is, it's kamesu michachara, sensual misconduct, and you're better off not doing it. Even though there might be some wholesome side effect that spins off from that, still, as a general rule, you're better off not being sexually promiscuous. And it's bad for your health. It's just, you make bad karma for doing it, so that bad things are more likely to happen back to you. You're probably better off not doing it. Just, you don't want to be sexually promiscuous just in the off chance that it's going to result in some, ennui or, deeper dissatisfaction that's going to spur you on to something better. So I'm going to move on to Philalethes' next question, which is intellectual curiosity unenlightened behavior? And again, this is sort of second guessing what the mental states of an enlightened being would be like. And I can't really say for sure whether an enlightened being would be intellectually curious. I assume if it's like a craving for knowledge, then yeah, that would be unenlightened, because an enlightened being presumably would not have craving anymore. I mean, that's going with the Four Noble Truths. I mean, that's practically the definition of enlightenment, is the cessation of craving. But being open-minded, you're having conversations with people that come to visit you and just asking them about, their beliefs and so forth. Being bahusutta, according to the Pali, which means being, learned or having heard much. That's not necessarily unenlightened, but it would depend on your motives. If it's motivated by craving, if it's motivated by attraction, like greed for knowledge, that sort of thing, then it would be unenlightened. So let's see here. I'll just move on to Philalethes' next question. He says, increasingly, I am coming to believe that all businesses should be legally mandated by the government to accept cash. Thoughts? And I agree with this. In fact, it says here, I'm going to take some money out of my pocket here. Let's see, $20 bill. Does it say it? See, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So it says right on the money that, if you owe someone money, they can't refuse cash. But nowadays, there are places that refuse cash. Like, I think Costco doesn't accept cash, which is not good. But I almost had to sleep on the street in New Orleans on my way to South Carolina, because I had I went to this hotel and they would not accept cash. And it's like, I was just recently a monk. I was still wearing robes. I didn't have any other clothes yet. And I had no credit cards. And they're saying, I'm sorry, we can't accept cash. And then they said, there's a Holiday Inn a few blocks down that way. Maybe they'll probably accept cash. So I took all of my belongings practically, including this Burmese military, like a footlocker thing that had no wheels on it, and the handle broke off. I'm just struggling getting all my stuff 2 blocks down the road to go to the Holiday Inn, and they wouldn't accept cash either. So then I had to come back to the other place, struggling the whole way, just panting and sweating. And then, they wouldn't even let me get a room, even if I had a credit card. They're saying, do you have a reservation? I said, no. Well, you can't stay here without a reservation. I say, well, do you have any vacancies? Yeah, we got vacancies, but still, you got to have a reservation. So then he said, well, how about you just sit over there, and online, you open up your computer, your laptop, and online, You can make a reservation. I mean, it's so stupid. But I mean, refusing to accept cash, I finally had to wake up my sweetheart and have her send them her credit card information just so I'd have some place to sleep, so I wouldn't have to sleep in the street, because they would not accept money. And yeah, there should be a law that, I mean, if you got to pay for something, they should be required to accept cash, because that is money. That's what money is. So let's see here. I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And Siddhartha Lohachita says, the last moment just before death, I forgot to do the thing to the computer. No, it's too late now. Oh, there it went. Nice. Okay, Siddhartha Lohachita says, the last moment just before death, according to Vajrayana, is said to be one of the most important moments in human existence. That precise moment before dying can either benefit or ruin your next rebirth. For example, seeing someone you hate right before dying and dying with that intense karma due to the hatred in your guts just before passing away would generate very bad karma, so strong that it could even override the karma accumulated through your previous life, and it works the other way around as well. If an evil person before dying sincerely repents for their wrongdoings, that positive karma at the moment of death might outweigh all the negative karma accumulated throughout their life. What does Theravada say about the moment just before death? Well, I've had it pointed out to me that there's more than one explanation in Theravada. That one explanation in Theravada is somewhat along the lines of what Siddhartha Lohachita was saying, although it's not going to completely override your karma. It's like, let's say that you've been an evil person, and then on your deathbed, right before dying, you're feeling intense love for the person who's taking care of you so selflessly, that you have compassion and love and gratitude for this person. Now, one of the first times in your life, maybe, but still you die in this wholesome mental state, then that's going to be like, you're going to have like the bearing towards a better rebirth because of that. But still, it's not going to completely negate all your past karma. So you might be reborn as some rich, beautiful person, but then again, you're going to have all kinds of problems because all this bad karma you made isn't just going to go away. Or similarly, it's like you've been a good saintly person, a wise person most of your life, and then like you get murdered or something, and you're feeling just like rage and hatred towards this person who is killing you. Then again, you might wind up, you've got like this bearing, you're heading in like a negative direction, but still all of your good karma is very much going to like ameliorate this, you're reborn as an animal or something, but you're like some spoiled poodle, and then you don't live very long, and then just after a few years or whatever, then you move on to something better. So there is that in Theravada also. It's not as extreme as Siddhartha Lohachita explains for Vajrayana, but that belief is common to Hinduism also, which is like one reason why Mahatma Gandhi, when he got shot, his last words were, "Hey Ram," not like, "Oh God," like in the movie. So starring Ben Kingsley. I mean, you could kind of translate "Hey Ram" as "Oh God," but it's not like, "Oh God, I've been shot." It's like, "Hey God," because he wanted his mind focused on God as his last conscious thought, which is going to help bring him closer to God after he dies. So, let's see. So it's like your last moment is going to influence like the direction you're headed after, like at death, but it's not going to completely override all of your karma. So you can be an evil person, have one good thought right at the moment of death. It's not going to just have you live a good life next time. It's like you might wind up some spoiled rich kid, and then you're going to get, addicted to heroin and just messed up and getting like bad drug deals and all this stuff, and it's just going to be a mess. I mean, I knew this rich man in Burma. He was a really good guy, devout Buddhist, and he got sort of drafted into the national parliament because he was kind of a rich, influential, good person. So the government just told him, "You're a member of parliament now," and he didn't want to go, but you don't really say no to the government, otherwise you just kind of disappear. But this really good guy, I mean, all of his kids were just messed up, partly because they were just spoiled rich kids and with no concept of why should I have to behave myself. So we had one kid that's just pretty much like the kid that I just described, just strung out on heroin and all messed up, like Hunter Biden types. So I guess I answered that question. And so I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's second question. I've heard about some Hindu sects who say that if you wish just before to die to become a deva, probably you can become one. Is that a Hindu superstition? Yeah, that's pretty much of a Hindu superstition. If you're just like a crude person with crude beliefs, a crude mind, and you have this crude desire to be reborn as a deva, then it's not going to happen. It may be if you're like a saintly, wise person who dies with your mind directed towards becoming a deva, then it's like this directional thing, like I was just mentioning in answering the second question or the previous question. I mean, that's a possibility. But if you're just a superstitious, foolish person that has this superstitious, foolish desire to be a deva, I mean, it's probably not going to happen. Even your like idea of what it is to be a deva is going to be just grossly unrealistic. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the idea that if you die in Benares, then I think it's the god Shiva is going to come to you when you're on the funeral pyre and whisper some secret name of God into your ear, which is going to cause you to be reborn in some heaven realm. Yeah, I think that's just pretty much of a superstition also. Although, like, a really wise person who believes something like that might be able to manifest something along those lines in accordance with the belief system they inherited from their culture. So, I think I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's next question here, which is, during your time in Burma as a monk, you developed some deep friendships with some monks like Sariputta and Moggallana. I assume he means that my friendship with monks was sort of like Sariputta and Moggallana were friends, and not like I had friends that resembled Sariputta and Moggallana. And Sariputta and Moggallana, they blended together like milk and water. They were so compatible with each other. And I mean, I had some friends, some monk friends in Burma that, I was always kind of a loner. There was always kind of a culture barrier. I had a few Western friends too, but Westerners, we may not be as compatico as like ancient Indian friends could have been. And the Burmese friends, there was still sort of a culture barrier, that kind of thing. So I had good friends, but I don't think I never had any friendships in the monkhood with other monks that were really close, mainly because I was a loner. I tended to avoid other monks anyway, usually. But I did have some good friends. So I guess I answered that question. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I had a few. Let's see. I guess I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from PSA. PSA says, this is kind of a dated question already. It was asked less than a week ago. But what do you think of the falling out between Elon and Trump? And I guess they've already made up. I guess they're at least civil towards each other. They're not like making these wild accusations against each other. But I think Elon personally, I mean, Elon Musk, he's brilliant, despite Democrats saying he's stupid. I mean, he's smarter than they are, and I mean, he's just kind of he's on the spectrum. And also, he's like the richest man in the world. He's a CEO of a number of different companies. He's used to getting his way. And then he's up against someone whose ego is even bigger than his is, and who's more powerful than he is, arguably. He's the president of the United States and is actually exercising his powers rather than just letting bureaucrats just go along with the status quo. And so it was just sort of like the two of them were too big for the same town, kind of. And I think Elon, he overreacted. I mean, mainly the falling out was caused by Trump's big, beautiful bill actually sort of increasing government spending, even though Elon Musk was doing everything he can to just cut it down as much as possible. Sort of like when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he like allegedly fired like 75 to 80% of the employees, and everything was fine. Everything just continued functioning. And he was kind of wanting the same thing to happen to the US government, where you just strip it way down, and it wasn't going to happen. I mean, Trump really isn't a king. He can't just get anything he wants passed. He's going to be having to toss bones to all sorts of, senators and Congress people that are going to be voting for this bill. If they're not getting what they want, they're going to vote no. And so, I mean, it would be good to cut spending more than it's being cut, but still, Elon just kind of overreacted, and he's just used to getting his way because he's the richest man in the world, and he's a CEO, and he just butted heads with someone whose head is even harder than his is. But I think probably enough people talked sense to him, including on X. He was getting a lot of blowback on X. People saying, why are you doing this? It's crazy. So I guess, I don't know if they're really friendly or not, but they've kind of patched things up, and they're not openly hostile towards each other anymore. But I was sorry to see that all of a sudden they were hating each other. I mean, you don't want that to happen. At least I don't. So I hope that they can be friends in the future. So I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question. What do you think about Trump completely banning Burmese citizens from visiting the U.S.? Yeah, that surprised me. That I saw the list of countries that were on like a visa ban or something. They weren't allowed to come to America. To have Burma on the list, yeah, that was. I think it wasn't really Trump's decision, or he just said, come up with a list of the most repressive, brutal governments. But I mean, I don't think there's any risk at all letting Burmese people come to America, because I mean, what are they going to do? Really? I mean, they're not going to be like blowing themselves up or crashing planes into buildings or anything. I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, they can't even overthrow their own government unless, I mean, I think he's assuming they're going to be agents of the government. But even what's a government agent? Some spy or something working for the Burmese government. I mean, what are they going to do? I don't think they would pose any risk at all. So I just assume it was just on a list of the most repressive governments in the world. And I mean, better safe than sorry, I suppose. But it was surprising to me, because I don't think that allowing Burmese citizens to visit the U.S. legally would pose any threat whatsoever to the USA and its national interests. Might actually be beneficial, unless they just kind of come in on a visa and then disappear. That happens from visitors from. I think a lot of the illegal aliens in America just overstayed visas. It was time, their visa expired, and they just said, so what? I'm staying. And then they just hide from the authorities. It's just, stable, keep their head down. There was a nutty German nun who was staying at the first monastery where I was ordained in California. and she had a classical textbook case of schizophrenia. Very difficult to work with. You know, one of the symptoms of schizophrenia, the classic textbook symptoms, is just seeing absolutely no reason whatsoever why you should cooperate with anybody. And there was a monastery attendant there who was having serious problems with this woman. So he actually called the immigration authorities. And I mean, the California immigration authorities, this was back in like 1990. So, I mean, already they were so inundated by illegal aliens from Mexico. They didn't want to deal with some German nun. You know, they just didn't do anything. Of course, they didn't do anything with regard to most of the Mexicans and so forth either. So, I don't know why I brought that one up. Yeah, I'm just moving on to the next question. That was just a gratuitous aside, I suppose. So, next question from PSA. There is a sutta where the Buddha described the gradual decrease of morality worldwide, accompanied by a generational decrease of lifespan, to the point where people would only live to be 10 years old, and the global moral decline would culminate in 7 days of a horrendous free-for-all sword fight. Do you think we're headed in that direction right now? No, I do not. I'm more Darwinian than Buddhist with regard to my understanding of where we came from and the general trends. Like lifespan is increasing and not decreasing, or at least up until the last couple decades maybe, that the lifespan is increasing rather than decreasing. And, we're becoming more soft. We're not becoming necessarily more homicidal. So, yeah, I really don't think that human beings started off being like essentially gods who didn't have to eat food, just living on light, and then gradually started this kind of downward spiral. Somebody just ate some of this nutrient-rich manna-like mud, and then that all of a sudden they started liking it, and then all of a sudden they have to eat food now. The lifespan goes from thousands and thousands of years, and then gradually gets worse and worse and worse and worse till you're down to like 10 years, where, it's like people go through puberty at like 5, and it's just, cannibalism and all this stuff going on. Yeah, I really don't see that actually happening. Not literally. I mean, things can get worse. I mean, if there was like a World War III or something, then the lifespan would go way down, and there'd probably be some like people killing each other to steal their food or just to eat them or whatever. Things can get a lot worse than now, obviously, but I don't think that things are gradually going down from a golden age. I'm skeptical of the idea that there was ever a golden age. Things have always been fucked up because we are human. We've been in the Kali Yuga since prehistory. So, yeah, I do not think we are headed in that direction right now, at least unless that there's like some cataclysm, like a nuclear war or maybe some asteroid impact that just like collapses civilization, that kind of thing. Then something along those lines could happen, but still people aren't going to be going through puberty at the age of 5. And there's going to be no horrendous free-for-all sword fight. I mean, that horrendous free-for-all sword fight reminds me of the Book of Mormon. I actually read the Book of Mormon. And according to the Book of Mormon, there were 2 migrations of humans into North America. The first was when the Tower of Babel collapsed. I can't remember the name of the patriarch, but he took some people to America. North America, I guess. And it divided up into like 2 factions who then fought to extinction until there was only one human left. You had like women and babies and stuff out on this battlefield with like scimitars and spears and stuff, and just fighting until there was only one person left alive. And no, I don't think that really happened. And I don't think it's likely to happen ever. Although things can get really bad if there's some sort of calamity that collapses civilization. But still, it's not going to be as bad as the Buddhist sutta says it's going to be. And the Buddha himself, is one of the questions he refused to answer was like the origin of the world. And then this, I think it's the same sutta in the Digha Nikaya, where he just kind of reneges on that and gives like this very mythological kind of history of the world, like how it began and everything. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Bio Individual. And Bio Individual says, is it indeed true that from an ultimate perspective, nothing ever happens? And he may have asked this question on the Discord server because there are a few people who are posting memes on this theme of, there's like this character, this cartoon character. You know, he's always saying nothing ever happens. You know, he's kind of frowning. And so the bio individual asked, you know, is it true from an ultimate perspective, nothing ever happens? And yes, from an ultimate perspective, from the perspective of ultimate reality, nothing happens. I mean, there's no events. There are no discrete entities to participate in events. You know, it's just uniform, if it's anything at all. But alternately, in samsara, it's like the opposite is true. Something always has to be happening in samsara. Always. There's just like constant change. Everything is impermanent. And that's just the nature of samsara. It's the nature of mind, the nature of what humans are pleased to call consciousness. There always has to be change. Otherwise, there's no perception of the passage of time. I mean, there would at least have to be some kind of like vibrating kind of hum in your mind that would seem to be like some kind of staticky change that would allow you to perceive the passage of time. Because if everything stayed exactly the same, you'd be like a statue. You wouldn't even be alive for that moment. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Rui. And Rui says, where did you hear the best Pali ever and by whom? Probably the best Pali I have heard is from Sri Lankan monks, because the Burmese have a very weird Burmese accent when they speak Pali, and the Thais also have a weird Thai accent. Like in Thailand, it's like B is pronounced like P, P is pronounced like B, D is pronounced like T, T is pronounced like D. Like Budo, it becomes Puto. So neither the Burmese nor the Thais nor the Mons, I've heard Mon Pali too. None of that is really, it's just like this weird accent superimposed on Pali. And it's like whenever a language goes into a foreign culture, that language is going to be spoken with the accent of the foreign culture as a general rule. So Westerners who speak Pali speak it with like a Western accent, like there's no aspirated consonants. You know, like D and DH are pronounced the same. Like Buddha is spelled like, or it's pronounced like it would just be Buddha. The two D's aren't like in actual correct Pali, the two D's would be pronounced distinctly, Buddha. And then there'd be the H, Buddha. There'd be something like that. And so I was told that I was an Indian monk was telling me in Burma that if the Brahmins in India heard the way the Burmese were pronouncing Pali, they'd just be laughing their asses off. So it may be the Indian monks who come closer to like a classical pronunciation of Sanskrit, which is similar to Pali, would come closest to like the correct or original pronunciation of Pali. But the best I've heard is probably from Sri Lankan monks, because like what is considered to be international correct Pali is essentially the Sri Lankan pronunciation of it. And where did I hear it? Well, I used to spend some time at a Sri Lankan monastery in California. I met a few Sri Lankan monks in Burma also. So it'd be one of those two places, either Mahagandhayon, where I met some Sri Lankan monks, or this Sri Lankan monastery in California that I would visit sometimes. I don't recall the name of the place. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Yuga. And Yuga says that I didn't answer his question last time, so he's asking it again, but I don't recall having seen it. He says, I've been watching Ajahn Punadamo, and he talks a lot of some primordial mind that was before hindrances. What mind is he talking about? If that is a mind state that we need to see true reality, how come then that primordial minds has not seen it then? Now, Thai forest tradition has certain things that are not really orthodox, but it's Thai forest tradition, like eating cheese in the afternoon. Thai forest monks, a lot of them, probably most of them, think it's fine and dandy for a monk to eat cheese in the afternoon, even though it's in all likelihood not okay. Like curd is forbidden in the afternoon, explicitly forbidden. And cheese is just a kind of purified curd. You compress curd to get the excess whey out. And then that's cheese. You can culture it, but still cheese contains more curd, more actual curd, technically speaking, than what is called curd has. And curd is not allowable. And so, in addition to eating cheese in the afternoon or smoking cigarettes, that kind of thing that is just accepted by the Thai forest tradition, there's also this belief in this primordial mind, the chitta, which is pronounced like jit in Thai, I suppose, because C is pronounced like J is pronounced like C, Pali C, that kind of thing. They get their consonants switched around. So, yeah, it could be derived from Hinduism, because Hinduism had a strong, cultural impact on Thailand, especially. Not quite so much in Burma, but Thailand. I mean, Thailand is right on the border with Cambodia. Like in Cambodia, that was largely Hindu for a long time. Like Angkor Wat was Hindu. So it could be that the Thai forest tradition in Thailand has come up with this idea of the primordial mind more from Hinduism than from Buddhism. Orthodox Theravada Buddhism does not endorse the idea at all. Although there is a little bit of unorthodox Theravada or pre-Theravada. Like I've mentioned a number of times, there are two suttas, one in the Digha Nikaya, one in the Majjhima Nikaya, that refers to essentially nirvana as infinite formless consciousness. Unmanifest, luminous all round. And so this was a belief in Buddhism going way back into ancient times that just kind of fell through the cracks. It eventually was rejected in favor of other theories. Mainly just the idea that you should not reify the absolute. So the Thai forest tradition has more of a belief in this primordial mind than is quite orthodox, due to cultural factors in Thailand, maybe. But, the official position of Theravada Buddhism, or maybe the unofficial, but it's definitely the position, is to keep reification of the absolute to a minimum. You do not try to describe ultimate reality. And, yeah, there are suttas, there's one other kind of famous sutta, I don't remember what Nikaya it's in, where it's like this mind is shining forth, but it is defiled by incoming defilements, extraneous defilements. And there is kind of a theme that could be interpreted that way, even as far back as the Atthakavagga, where even your own thoughts are considered to be extraneous from just something coming from outside. That in a way, there's the implication is if you don't have anything to do with these extraneous influences, then you're just naturally going to be pure. And those extraneous influences include your own thoughts, your own beliefs. So, there are certain statements in the text that kind of can lend some support to this Thai forest tradition idea that you've got this primordial jit, that it's like the one who sees, that kind of thing. but it's not exactly orthodox. It's more like what the Upanishads is talking about with regard to the Atman. The Atman is Brahman. Thou art that. That's essentially the kind of teaching that is favored by a lot of Ajahns in the Thai forest tradition. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cherzaskaz's. And we're getting down towards the bottom. This is going to be way less than 2 hours, which is kind of a nice change of pace for those of you who don't like 3-hour-long videos. And Cherzaskaz's says, if karma is not a cosmic law and isn't stored somewhere out there like in universe's library, but it's our own mental states or volition and nothing else, Arahants do not make any new karma, so don't Arahants have mental states or volition? Well, let's just start off with the orthodox answer to that question, like in Abhidhamma, the Abhidhamma Pitaka. According to the Abhidhamma Pitaka, Arahants still have mental states, but they don't have like volition in the same way we do. They don't have Chetana in the same way that we do. So because Chetana is karma. Karma is volition. Karma is will. So Arahants don't have that kind of will that makes karma. Instead, they've got what is called Kiriya Chitta, which is mentioned nowhere in the suttas, I'm pretty sure. It was apparently invented to account for this problem by early Abhidhamma scholars. It's functional consciousness that allows an Arahant to perform what appear to be volitional acts, while at the same time, it's not really volition. And St. John of the Cross had a similar idea for the Christian Arahant, the perfected Christian, which, before I read St. John of the Cross, I just assumed that, nobody is worthy. The only way anyone gets into heaven is through the grace of God. But here's St. John of the Cross, who was like a meditation master, describing what is very similar to a Buddhist Arahant and declaring it to be possible and even accomplished by Christians, like meditation master Christians, contemplative, like monastic Christians. And he was saying that you reach this stage of perfection by mortifying your self-will. Self-will is pretty much what the Buddhists are calling Chetana, which is making karma. So you mortify your self-will so you don't have any more self-will. And so you are just automatically motivated by the will of God, that you become a kind of divine puppet. You no longer have your own will. It's just that you are acting through the will of God in this effortless flow. So that is like a Christian attempt to explain how an Arahant can act without making karma, without having volition or will. But it could also be that we're dealing with two different levels of reality, where at the samsaric level, there's still will. It's just that the Arahant has just transcended that, no longer identifies with it. It's just nature taking its course. So that's another way of looking at it. But again, it's like trying to second guess the mental states of an enlightened being, which is like a recurring theme in these Q&As. It's like, what would the Buddha think? Or, what are the mental states of an enlightened being like? And, it's sort of like dogs trying to understand the mental states of a human. Even if you explained it to them, they still wouldn't get it. Just because you'd have to be human to get it. So, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question already. This is from RFS. And RFS asks an interesting question that I never really thought about before. And it's talking about St. John of the Cross, contemplative Christians again. He says, did St. John of the Cross sit cross-legged when practicing high contemplation? Was there a general recommended posture the contemplative Catholics practiced in? And I've read the entire works of St. John of the Cross. I do not recall him mentioning anywhere what position you would be in when you're practicing high contemplation. It's standard for a Catholic when they're praying to be on their knees. But I have read that, you can sit in a chair. It may be that like a Catholic contemplative, like a Carmelite, discalced Carmelite, like St. John of the Cross, they might be just sitting on a chair. Or it could be, in some cases, they'd be on their knees, like as though they were praying. But I think meditation, just like visualizing, scenes from the Bible, that kind of thing, is more likely done in a sitting position. And sitting on like a hard wooden bench, I would assume, I don't think that they would be adopting any yogic cross-legged postures. I could be mistaken. Maybe nowadays, now that they, like some contemplative monks and nuns know about like yoga, they might be adopting like the full lotus or the half lotus or something. But in 16th century Spain, I think there's a good chance they would just be sitting on like a hard wooden bench or some wicker chair, or maybe just on their knees in front of an altar. But it seems like it'd be easier sitting than having to hold yourself up on your knees, unless you're kind of like sitting back on your heels or something. But even then, I mean, your knees would get awful sore, but they were ascetics. They were used to being in pain. So I really can't say for sure, but I would guess it would be either kneeling as though in prayer, or probably more likely sitting like on a chair or a wooden bench or something. And that's it. That's the last question. And like I should always say at the beginning, never do. If you have any questions you think I can answer, especially with regard to the stuff I've been answering that I've been able to answer, and not like the stuff that people have asked that I couldn't answer, then I probably won't be able to answer that. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. If you find anything of value in all this, and be happy. I'm going to stop recording now.